talks in this session, then a bit of discussion, then we'll all be blown away with the trees and buildings by the storm. So, and the first speech, which I'll call a keynote, it will actually be relatively short, is by my father, Ted Goertzel, who's a sociology professor, on predicting the age of posthuman intelligences. A look at the past, present, and future of predicting radical advances of various types, and some implications for predicting AGI and its implications.
Oh, thank you for staying so late and after so many talks. I taught Ben everything he knew about computers, but that was up till the age 10. Then he sort of went on beyond where I am. But I'm talking about predictions. It's easy to make fun of predictions. Lots of predictions have been wrong. Wilbur Wright, Robert Millikan, there's no likelihood man can ever tap the power of the atom. Paul Ehrlich predicting that the battle to feed humanity was over. But there have also been successful predictions that we don't hear so much about, predicting the fall of the Soviet experiment, although it didn't happen as quickly as he said. So it's easier to predict what's going to happen than to say when it's going to happen. That was used as an example of a failed prediction in the 60s, and then in the 90s it came true. Harrison Brown, other people predicted patterns of energy and food production. Ray Kurzweil made a number of predictions for the year 2009, like most books would be read on screens, driverless cars would be in use. That came pretty close to coming true that quickly, and are coming true rather quickly. There's a guy named Herman Kahn did a book in 2000 which had a large number of predictions and that did remarkably well. It's been evaluated systematically by some social scientists afterwards. I listed...
The book was in 1967, right? And it was predicting...
In 67, he made predictions for the year 2000, excuse me. Yes, he came out in 1967. He picked the year 2000 because that's the turn. Everybody used to predict for 2000, although the turn of the century didn't actually mean anything. His predictions had a remarkably good record in the technological area. I think about 80%, if I recall correctly. 80% of their predictions about computers and communications were correct. 50% of their others turned out to be correct, according to a careful evaluation. On the other hand, there's the book The Population Bomb, which predicted absolutely, completely wrong. However, it was very successful, a bestseller, got him a MacArthur Award, got him all kinds of rewards, and he's been a celebrity ever since. By the time 2000 came around, very few people remembered Herman Kahn's book, except a few people who happened to study prediction. And that raised a question about why do prediction, what the point is. And often the point is to influence events rather than to make predictions. So Ehrlich's led to the zero population movement, the one-child policy in China. All kinds of changes occurred, despite the fact that his analysis was totally wrong, for reasons that I won't have time to go into now. For this presentation, I examined 5 different approaches to long-term forecasting. These are bodies of literature out there that actually try to make long-term forecasts, like for 50 or 100 years. One of which is in the environmental area. We're familiar with that with predictions of global warming. There's the long-wave analysis that's named after Kondratiev, who was a Russian economist. He was hired by Lenin and the communists to predict when the fall of capitalism would occur. And he said, yeah, there's going to be a crisis. On the other hand, capitalism is going to bounce back and it's a cycle, which is not what they wanted to hear. But many people have pursued that approach. There's a generational cycle analysis, which is a completely different body of literature based on cultural analysis. There's geopolitical futurism. And then there are people who study technological revolution. So there are 5 different bodies of literature, each of which I will just summarize extremely briefly. Environmental futurism does offer some definite predictions. Population will reach about 9 billion in 2050. And then level off. Here you can see the population growth in different regions of the world. Peak production of conventional oil should come in the 2030s, fracking oil and so on a decade later. Global temperatures will increase by 3 to 4 degrees centigrade by 2100. I'm just giving you some of the conclusions that they've reached. Kondratiev long-wave analysis has found long cycles in the world economy. These were detected empirically. Nobody really had a theory of why on earth there should ever be such a thing. And there's a tremendous technical literature on it. It may be due to a 55.83-year lunisolar cycle that affects agriculture. That's the best explanation. But if that's not right, at least they happen. If this continues, we can expect peaks in the world economy in 2036 and 2094. Periods of technological revolution then would be predicted just after that in the 2040s and the 2100s. Generational cycle analysis says every 25 years you get a new generation. And nobody really knows why that is, because children are born every year. It's not like in a family where generations are 20 years apart. But this seems to happen. There's a variation between active and recessive sorts of generations. Certain generations generate a lot of activity. And it correlates with the Kondratiev wave. Whether it causes the Kondratiev wave or is caused by it or whatever is debatable. This says that in 2094 we'll have an adaptive generation that will build on the accomplishments of their predecessors. So if you, what? This is all humans. Whether robots have generations or how fast they go, this, I say, has been observed empirically in cultural literature. This book, The History of America's Future, went on to 2069. You can continue the cycles on. Whether they apply, there's been work on this done in Europe as well, not so much in third world or other countries. I don't have time to go into the evidence behind it, any of these. Geopolitical futurism, there's a guy named George Friedman who's a futurist working mostly for corporations. He's published a book called The Next 100 Years, mostly to publicize his firm. And he's got a number of events. Russia falls apart in the 2020s. China fragments. Turkey, Poland, and Japan will become major powers. He predicts a third war in the 2050s, a world war, but it won't be nuclear, but there will be space rays that will shoot down and so on. It's very interesting because it leads you to think about geopolitical things that are different from what's happening right now. And the United States is going to decline relative to Mexico because of population decline. And Czar is flashing the sun in my eyes with his watch without meaning to. So that gives you the idea of cycles. And many of these things are cyclical. There's a rise and fall of empires, but then the same empire can have another cycle. The British Empire had 200-year cycles. He thinks the United States will continue to be the dominant power in the world for the next 100 years. And he attributes this to technology and computers and the environment of creativity of computer science, Silicon Valley, and so on. Technological revolution analysis also is cyclical in the sense that they always conclude that there are certain periods where there are bursts of technological innovation, such as steam and railways, the age of steel, the age of oil, the age of information and telecommunications. It's not clear why there should be cycles, because technological innovation clearly is continuous, but nevertheless these are observed by the historians, caused by some systematic phenomenon where social institutional factors play a key role by resisting and then facilitating, according to the best known book on the topic. She has no idea what's going to happen in the future, however. She's not a futurist. But if you project it out, you can see when the things are going to happen. You can make charts like this. You can look this up on my website and get one you can read. Don't have time to do that now. What we have is a mishmash of linear, exponential, sigmoid curves, and cyclical patterns. There's no theory that brings these all together. They don't have any theoretical basis in common. Maybe the Kondratiev and the generational have some tie. Some of the others are completely unrelated. Nevertheless, they come together with a surprising synchronicity at least 3 of our models. And these lead to the observation that the singularity will come either in the 2040s or the 2100s. So I have 2 predictions. If it doesn't happen by the 2040s, it'll happen in the 2100s. Which is going to be depends to some extent on decisions that are made. So it's not like the future is totally determined. Things can change it. The other question is, why make predictions? Kahn's work shows that technological developments can be predicted when the theoretical problems have been solved, and it's mostly engineering. AGI is getting to that point. We have a theoretical model, and it's mostly engineering it, if you think the theoretical model is going to work. On the other hand, predicting correctly may not do you any good. If you make the correct prediction, you may be ridiculed, and the person who makes the wrong prediction will get all the awards and will have all the influence because he says what people want to hear, what they're afraid to hear. So I'm not sure if we should make a prediction. One of Paul Ehrlich's collaborators says to put too much emphasis on the correctness or incorrectness of a prediction is to miss the main point. The point is to get people to do what you want them to do and talk about what you want them to talk about. So that may be more important than actually being correct. That's sort of sour grapes because they were totally wrong, but it's not a bad point. If you look at the technological people who try to predict these things, I also find there are two groups, which I could call the optimists and the pessimists. The optimists are Ray Kurzweil, Daryl Nazareth, Francis Heiligen, Ben Goertzel, all expected around 2040, which is the same time as my futurist group would predict it. The pessimists are Sebastian Thrun, Bill Gates, predict it it'll come around 2100, which is the second time. So the technological predictors also fall into these two groups, two predictions. Both of these fit into the Kondratiev technological cycle, generational cycle analysis. Third group is the naysayers who say we really shouldn't do this at all, but none of them have predicted any way to stop it from happening. So they're not really, they're not making a prediction so much as complaining about what they don't want to happen. I think if it's going to happen by the 2040s, it would have to be engineered. You have to have a detailed engineering model, which we do have in the Cog Prime model in this book by Ben Goertzel and Cassio Panachin, who's also here in the room if he hasn't given up. And I don't know if Niles is here, but at any rate, three people you probably know. If we had enough funding to support this, which would, if you look at Herbert Simon's predictions, he predicted things coming too soon, but he predicted based on the assumption there'd be more resources, like playing chess. He thought in 10 years the computers would beat the world champion in chess, and it took like 30 years. But if he had made his prediction in terms of man years of computer programmer time, he feels he was about right. He just thought there'd be more resources. So it depends on more resources going into it. And then again, the model has to work, which Ben tells me it's going to work. I have to believe him, being his father, but who knows? You guys know better than me about that. That's the way we would get it in the 2040s. The other group is the idea who have the global brain, which we've looked at, and they seem to think that it's somehow going to self-organize out of distributed intelligence. Personally, I'm skeptical, but who knows? My future scenario, now what can we do? What am I doing scenarios? What can we do about all of this? Probably should have put that slide earlier. I think what we need to do is to, first of all, think about it, get people thinking about it, think about the various possibilities. I think I have that slide at the end, but I'll go to it now. Don't wait for the singularity as if it was some kind of, oh, the singularity is going to come and everything is going to be wonderful. It's just like the revolution or the return of the Messiah. It's going to be gradual. What we need to do is work on imaginaries. I'm going to a conference in Madrid called Utopian Imaginaries, concepts, utopias, scenarios, philosophies. We heard some philosophies earlier. I think learning to think about it and learning to think about different ways that it might happen. And that's the presentations we've had in the last hour, talking about different ways it might happen. And experimenting. We're going to have lots of experiments, such as Ethereum, Bitcoin, older experiments like the kibbutzim in Israel that are changing and privatizing. I think things like Uber, Amazon, Turk, all of these are experiments. We're going to need to keep experimenting with things. My scenario is that thousands of AGIs will develop simultaneously in different ways. I don't think we're going to get one AGI and one global brain. Things that are building today, like climate modeling and people who are modeling the stock market, they're parts of the future global brain, if you want to look at it that way. The boundaries between biological brains and artificial brains and the global brain are permeable and variable. So I see the global brain a lot like Wikipedia. I mean, it's part of my brain. I can access it. Once in a while I change it, and if I change it, it changes for everybody else. And it works somehow, and it self-organizes itself. It's an amazing example. The AGIs will have to police each other, much as other Wikipedia is policed. Ben has a more detailed scenario, but I won't have time to go into that. But it is in our book, The End of the Beginning, which just came out. It's only $4.99. It's about that thick. Many people here have articles in it, and I bought some copies of the table of contents, if anybody wants to see that. But I think I'm going to end because I know we're trying to move along. So that's it for me. Put this on your ear for your...
Thank you, Sam.